everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back, and if you are new, thanks for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. I hope that you are all doing well. Today I thought that I would do something a little differently, or a little different than what I'm used to doing. I am going to talk about audiobooks. I'm not here to debate whether or not audiobooks are really reading or any of those kind of things, but what I want to do and what I'm going to do is share a bit of my struggles with audiobooks and also ways that I have found they work for me and how I've come to appreciate them. I will also give 7 suggestions that I enjoyed and that you might want to try if you haven't already. So to be honest, I have not always been a fan of audiobooks. At what time I wouldn't have even tried them. But over time, I have come to appreciate them under certain circumstances, and I have found, ways that they work for me. So I struggled with them for a number of reasons. I'd hear people say that they listened to audiobooks while they did something else, like while they cleaned their house, or while they did like other things. And that just does not work for me. I get easily distracted and then I wouldn't know what was happening, so I'd have to go back and restart it, and it would get very frustrating for me. And the narrator also makes a huge difference too. Some of the books that I've tried where the narration was difficult to get used to, and it just makes for a less enjoyable experience for sure. But good books can be ruined by a not so great narrator, it turns out. So here's what I've learned works for me. The best time for me to listen to books is while I'm driving. Yes, I know that I'm doing something else, but I don't get so distracted because it's like having a conversation with someone who is in the car with you. Except, they're not doing, you're not doing any talking, they're doing all the talking. And they're telling you a great story, hopefully. So that totally works for me, especially on long road trips when I'm on my own. So that's worked out very nicely several times. The other thing that I have found works for me is more personal, and you might not need to hear all of this. In fact, if you watch Shelly Swearingen's channel, then you might have seen some of her videos that she has editing Shelly, and this is where I kind of imagine editing Shelly coming in and giving you all a warning.
Heads up, you all. Jolene is going to talk about bathing for like a ridiculously long amount of time. Just warning you.
The other time that I find listening to audiobooks is while I'm taking a bath. And I'm not one who enjoys bubble baths. People say, that it's a time of relaxation for them. But I find that I actually get even more anxious because I feel like I'm wasting my time, and, I could be doing so many other things, besides sitting in water. But when we moved to Calgary, I have a lovely bathtub that I can use, and I thought, maybe I will give it a try. So the first 2 to 3 times I tried to have a bubble bath and just relax, and I couldn't do it. I forced myself to stay in the tub for like 4-5 minutes and then 10 minutes. And then someone suggested audiobooks. So I gave it a try, and now I listen to audiobooks when I want to relax and I take a bath. And if I feel that anxiety or that guilt of, wasting time, then I remind myself that it's also my reading, and enjoying a book time. So, I never feel guilty about that. So that has really worked for me. And I have now, been known to stay in the tub for like over an hour.
I told you so.
So like I said, that might have been too much information. But the other thing that has helped me is mixing it up. So I used to think if I was listening to an audiobook, then I'm listening to a book, and if I'm reading a physical book, then I'm reading the physical book. But I found that what works is that, there's no rules. So I've learned to read and listen to books in whatever way that works for me at the time. So sometimes I mostly read the physical book. Other times, like on those road trips, I might actually just listen. And there's also like no rule against reading and listening at the same time, which is a really interesting experience too. So, okay, I have 7 suggestions of books that have worked for me as audiobooks. And first up is a poetry book. I love hearing poetry read out loud, so it makes perfect sense to listen to an audio poetry book. And the one that I want to suggest is called Dear Girl by Aija Mayrock, also narrated by Aija Mayrock. First of all, her poetry is very powerful, and it is spoken word poetry. So the audiobook is like listening to her perform her spoken word, and it is phenomenal. I find autobiographies and memoirs are best if they are read by the author. It actually adds another dimension because you can sometimes, hear them smile at a memory or react to their own story, which just adds this whole other layer. The autobiography that I am going to highlight is Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. I both read and listened to this book, but mostly listened. And when I listened, it was on a road trip to Denver, Colorado, and I swear Bruce Springsteen was in the car on that road trip with me, and we had a really great time. An exception to the rule of autobiographies or memoirs being narrated by the actual author is Me by Elton John. This autobiography was narrated by Taron Egerton, but he did such a fantastic job that I often had to remind myself that it wasn't Elton himself. So that says something. With the exceptions of memoirs and autobiographies, I have found that most authors who narrate their own books often don't do a great job. However, there are exceptions, and one of them is a book that I actually just finished yesterday, and that is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Again, I both read and listened to this book, and this book has a childlike innocence and fantasy vibe to it, and listening to Neil Gaiman read it only added to that feeling. It was such a comforting feeling having him read it. It was really cool. The other thing that I have found that can make or break the audio experience is whether or not the person narrating is the same background or culture of the main characters or a person telling the story. So it has made, like, when I'm reading about someone from Australia, let's say, and they actually have an Australian accent, and again, it just adds that extra layer to the experience and helps to bring the book to life. It also helps if they get the pronunciations of words and names correct, that I'm not familiar with. That's a really key thing as well. So my suggestion for this is A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry, which was narrated by, I think it's Vikas Adams, it could be Vikas. This is a long book, but it takes place in India, and I both read and listened to it, and Vikas narrates this book beautifully, emphasizing what needs to be emphasized and adding to the culture of the story. So it's a great book. And then I'll share 2 more books with you. A fiction book that I thought was very well narrated is Here We Are by Graham Swift, which was narrated by Phil Davis, and this book is so underrated. It's such a delightful read, and when I would listen to Phil Davis, he just did a great job narrating. I would highly recommend the book itself, but I think it's also a good one to try if you want to listen as well. And the last book that I'm going to recommend is a nonfiction. And I sometimes find nonfiction easier to listen to because it's not as character driven as fiction books tend to be. So it's easier to get into the topic. And the nonfiction book that I would suggest on audio is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. And this is narrated by Sean Pratt. Again, I read and listened to this book, but it was a good fit to be able to go back and forth with because of how it's structured, and it's also a very good story. So those are some suggestions of audiobooks that have worked for me. But ultimately, I would say that it comes down to, trial and error and just finding out what works for you and what doesn't. And I know that, I can't listen to an audiobook in bed because I will fall asleep and not have heard anything past the first 2 minutes. Some books are easier for me on audio than others, and I can, now take a bath and enjoy an hour of a book. But you've already heard enough about that. And I want to thank Editing Shelly for her help with this video. Very much appreciated. Please let me know if you listen to audiobooks, what works for you, what doesn't, what have been some of your favorite audiobooks to listen to. And what would you recommend to me or other people watching? I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.